Welcome to Swayam MOOC course NGOs and Sustainable Development, Unit 3, Module 24, Sustainability Assessment, Indicators, Targets. Learning Objectives. By the end of this module, you will be able to learn about the Sustainable Development Goals, Targets and Indicators. Learn about targets and indicators for each goal. Understand how each indicator are defined and measured. Global Indicator Framework for Sustainable Development Goals and Targets for the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development is presented. There are 17 SDGs as we have already seen in the earlier modules. So, these 17 SDGs can be classified under 3 dimensions: economic, social and environmental. So, if it is about life, we can classify SDG 1, 2 and 3 under life, and if it is economic and technological development, we can classify SDG 8 and 9, and both of this come into the economic dimension. Now, the social dimension, if we are talking, then with regard to social development, we can categorize SDG 11, SDG 16 and SDG 17 under social development, and SDG 4, 5 and 10 as equality dimensions. Now, when it comes to environmental dimension, we can classify SDG 6, SDG 7 and SDG 12 under resources, and SDG 13, SDG 14 and 15 under natural environment, both coming under the environmental dimensions. So, the SDG 17 goals can be classified into each of the 3 dimensions: economic, social and environmental dimensions. Now, this 17 SDGs has got goals, and each of these goals has got targets, and the targets, for achieving the targets, there are certain metrics used which we call as indicators. To understand the 17 SDGs, the targets and the indicators, let us look into this document. Now, this indicator indicates how each of the SDGs have been identified with targets and indicators. These indicators will tell us whether we have reached the targets, and the targets indicates whether we have achieved the goals. So, if we take SDG 1, which is end poverty in all its forms, then we find that the targets they have specified is 5 targets, and if we take target 1, by 2030 eradicate extreme poverty for all people, we find that it has got one indicator which is mentioned as 1.1.1. So, proportion of population living below the international poverty line divided by the sex, age, employment status or geographical location. So, this is the indicator which tells us which is used to measure whether we can achieve the target, and if we have achieved the target, it tells us whether we have reached the goal. So, similarly, for each of these goals there are targets given. So, if we take goal 1, there are 5 targets, and for each target there are indicators present which is shown on the right hand side. So, similarly, we have the measures which is indicative of achievement. So, they are called measures of achieving, which is highlighted as 1A and 1B. So, in addition to the 5 targets in goal 1, there are 2 measures of achieving which is indicated by 1A, 1B, and each of these measures of achieving has got its own indicators which is given as 1A1, 1A2. So, if we go for goal 2, which is end hunger, achieve food security and improve nutrition and promoting sustainable agriculture, we find that there are 5 targets which is given as 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5. So, there are 5 targets and there are 3 measures to achieve. So, the 3 measures to achieve are given as 2A, 2B, 2C, and on the right hand side we find that for each of these target. So, by 2030 if the target is to end hunger and ensure access to all people, then this target 2.1 has got two indicators. So, by measuring these indicators, we will know whether we have achieved the target. So, similarly, we have got for each of the goals. So, this is given for goal 2. So, similarly, we have for goal 3, we have 9 indicators, 2 measure 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D. So, 4 measures to achieve, and all the indicators are given on the right hand side. So, for goal 4, similarly we have all the targets, the measures to achieve and the indicators. So, similarly this data file indicates all the targets, the indicators and the measures to achieve each of the sustainability development goals. So, for the 17 goals, we have presented the targets, the indicators and the measures to achieve and their respective indicators. So, when we take the sustainability development goal 17, now in the case of sustainability development goal 17, they have categorized it further as finance target, technology target, capacity building target, trade target and systemic issues. So, in the systemic issues, they have brought in policy and institutional coherence, multi-stakeholder partnership, data monitoring and accountability. So, there are totally 19 targets in SDG 17, and these 19 targets have got their respective indicators. Now, let us go back and let us see how these indicators are measured. Now, when we come to this, we find that when they do this indicators, there are 3 types by which they are classified. It is called the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So, the indicators when they are measured, they are given a classification of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. If it is tier 1, it means that the indicator is conceptually clear. It has an internationally established methodology and standards. Data is regularly produced by the countries for at least 50% of the countries, and of the population in every region, the indicator is relevant. If such a data is available, an indicator is used to collect this data, then we call that as a tier 1 type of indicator. Now, if we call an indicator tier 2 type indicator, then it means that the indicator is conceptually clear. Internationally established methodology is there to collect data and to calculate the indicator. Standards are available, but data is not regularly produced by the countries. So, this means that this indicator comes under tier 2 indicator. Now, the tier 3 indicator is no internationally established methodology or standard is available for this indicator, but methodology and standards are being developed and is being tested. At least as of 51st session of the United Nations Statistical Commission, the global indicator framework does not contain any tier 3 indicators. So, they have tried to establish all the indicators in terms of tier 1 and tier 2. So, now let us see how the targets and indicators are presented for each of the goal. In this module, I am only presenting for goal 1. The notes in the SWAYAM platform will have all the details. So, here in this module, I am only presenting for goal 1. I am presenting all the targets as well as the indicators, how these indicators will be measured. So, now if you are taking goal 1, which is end poverty in all its forms everywhere, now we are going to the first target, target 1.1. So, target 1.1 says by 2030, we are going to eradicate poverty everywhere in the world, which is currently measured as people living with less than $1.25 per day. So, it means around 100 rupees per day. If somebody is living below this, if somebody is earning less than 100 rupees per day, then we say the person is living under the poverty line. So, we need, the first goal is to eradicate poverty. So, we try to fix the target that all across the world there will not be any person who is having who is earning an income less than $1.25 per day. So, now we are going to reach this target, we are going to find out certain metrics which will tell us whether everybody is above this level. So, those metrics we call that as indicators. So, now the first indicator is indicator 1.1.1, which says proportion of population living below the international poverty line, which is measured by age, by sex, by employment status and geographical location. The unit of measure for this indicator is percentage. So, the definition for this indicator is the proportion of the employed population below the international poverty line of $1.9. Now, this 1.25 was fixed earlier. Today, the current poverty line status is 1.9. So, the definition has been revised to state anybody living below the poverty line of $1.9 per day is referred to as the working poverty rate, and the share of employed persons living in households with per capita consumption or income that is below the international poverty line is treated as people living below the poverty of $1.9 per day. Now, how do we compute this? How do we measure? So, to measure the poverty across countries consistently, the World Bank international measures are used, and we apply a common standard anchored to what poverty means in the world poorest countries also. So, the original $1 a day was based on the compilation of national lines which was existing over 22 countries during 1991. So, this got revised based on 75 developing countries to 1.25 per day, and now that was in 2011. Later, the current extreme poverty line was set at 1.9 a day in 2011. So, based on this, the poverty line was fixed at $1.9 per day, and people earning below this was treated as living under poverty. So, when measuring the international poverty of a country, the international poverty line at PPP is converted to local currencies. So, from dollar it is converted to rupees based on 2011 price, and is then converted to price prevailing at the time of the relevant survey that was done among households, so that it is compared with the consumer price index to evaluate and arrive at the poverty index. So, the next target is target 1.2, which is by 2030 we reduce at least by half the proportion of men and women and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to the national definition. So, that is target 1.2. So, the indicator for that is 1.2.1, the proportion of population living below the national poverty line by sex and age. The unit of measure is proportion of the population. So, the definition given is the national poverty rate is the percentage of the total population living below the national poverty line. The rural poverty rate is the percentage of the rural population living below the national poverty line. Urban poverty rate is the percentage of urban population living below the national poverty line. So, how do we compute? The method for computation is also given by the methodology by SDG. So, they have given the formula for calculating the proportion of the total urban and rural population, the proportion living below the poverty line, and it is given as P of 0 equal to 1 divided by n, sum of I equal to 1 to n, the I of y of I is less than z, which is equal to n of p divided by n, and this is defined as I is the indicator function that takes on the value of 1 if the bracketed expression is true, and it takes the value of 0 if it is otherwise. If individual consumption or income y of I is less than the national poverty line is z, then I is equal to 1 and the individual is counted as poor. N of p is the total urban or rural number of people, and capital N is the total number of urban rural population, total urban or rural population as the case may be. Next, coming to indicator 1.2.2, it is the proportion of men, women and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions according to the national definition. The unit of measure keeps varying depending upon what is the equation that we are using. For indicator 1 and 5, it is the percentage of population, while for indicator 3 it is the percentage of household, and for 2 and 4 it is the proportion. So, the definition for the 4 series are used to monitor the sustainability development goal target 1.2.2. One is official multidimensional poverty head count by age by sex, which is percentage of the population, the percentage of people who are multidimensionally poor. The second measure under this indicator 1.2.2 is average share of weighted deprivation or intensity of total population. So, the average share of weighted dimension in which poor people are deprived from the total population is calculated, and this the unit for measure for this is proportion. Now, the third measure used under this indicator is official multidimensional poverty head count, which is percentage of household. So, the percentage of households who are multidimensionally poor is measured. The fourth measure under this indicator is average share of weighted deprivations intensity of total households. The average share of weighted dimensions in which poor people are deprived among the total household is calculated, and the unit of this measure is proportion. The fifth measure under this indicator is multidimensional deprivation of children, which is percentage of population whose age is below 18. So, they are treated as children. So, the percentage of children who are simultaneously deprived in multiple dimensions of well-being. So, that is calculated, and that comes as a measure under this indicator. So, each of this measure is calculated, and the composite value of these measures are taken together to give us a metric for the indicator 1.2.2. Now, coming to the computation, the measurement of poverty involves two crucial steps. One is identification. So, we need to identify who is poor, and second is aggregation. How do we compile the individual's information into a consolidated value, into a summary measure. So, these are two things which has to be taken into account when we calculate the composite value for the measure. Now, the third target is under goal 1 is target 1.3. This target is to implement nationally appropriate social protection systems and measures for all, including floors, and by 2030 we need to achieve substantial coverage of the poor and the vulnerable living in the country, in the world. So, each of these targets try to achieve or uplift the people who are living below the poverty line, so that they come up, the quality of life is improved, and by achieving each of these targets we try to achieve the goal 1. So, the indicators under the target 1.3 is proportion of population covered by the social protection floors or systems by sex, distinguishing children, unemployed persons, older persons, persons with disabilities, pregnant women, newborn, work injury victims, poor and the vulnerable. So, we have only one indicator for this target, and this indicator we measure in terms of percentage. So, the definition for this indicator is the indicator reflects the proportion of persons effectively covered by the social protection system, including the social protection floors. It also reflects the main components of the social protection. For example, the child and maternity benefits, the support of persons who are without a job, persons who have disabilities, how does the government support, the victims of work injuries, accidents at the job, how are they compensated for their accidents. So, such benefits are measured and they are calculated, and this gets into the indicator 1.3.1. Now, to compute calculations include separate indicators, because there are different types of benefits, there are different types of schemes that is given by the government. So, each of these schemes have to be calculated, have to be gathered, and calculation is the composite value is arrived after taking the percentage that is covered. So, rather than the amount, the number of people who are covered is considered, and that goes into the indicator. Now, coming to the target 1.4, the target to achieve goal 1 is by 2030 we ensure that all men and women, in particular the poor and the vulnerable, have equal right to economic resources as well as access to basic services, ownership and control over the land and other forms of property, inheritance and natural resources. Appropriate technology is given to them. They have financial services including microfinance. So, target 1.4 again talks about the people, giving financial aid to the people. So, we are trying to find out how many people are getting benefited through these schemes. So, there are indicators to measure this target. There are totally 2 indicators. So, the first indicator is proportion of population living in household with access to basic services. The unit for measure is not applicable here, because we have different types by which we need to compute the data. So, the definition for this is basic services could refer to the public service provision systems which meets the human basic needs like the drinking water availability, the sanitation, the hygiene, the mobility, the transportation services, the type of waste management system available, the waste collection system available, healthcare facilities, primary healthcare, education, the availability of information technology. So, all these services has to be computed, has to be gathered, and we need to measure, and using those values we try to tell whether we have achieved this indicator. So, the various components on which we need to measure include access, whether the community, the number of people, whether they have the percentage of people, the proportion of people who have access to basic drinking water supplies, basic sanitation services, basic hygiene facilities, clean fuel and technology, mobility, basic waste collection services, basic healthcare services, education, information services. So, these are the 9 components which need to be measured under the indicator 1.4.1. Computation will involve different types depending upon the data on which we are collecting. If it is education, then it has its own methodology, how many people get educated, are given the provision of education, whether bus services are available to the areas in all parts of the world. So, such computation is very individualistic, and based on the computation a composite number needs to be arrived to tell what is the level we have achieved for indicator 1.4.1. So, next coming to the second indicator. The second indicator is 1.4.2, which is proportion of total adult population with secure tenure rights to land with legally recognized documentation and who perceive their right to land as secure. Again, this is found by sex, by the type of tenure they have. So, there are 2 indicators to measure this target, and the unit of measure is proportion of people with legally recognized documents that they hold as their right to own the land, and it could be calculated in terms of how many male members have it, how many female members have it. So, it could be a percentage. Similarly, proportion of people who perceive their rights to land as secure out of the total adult population. Again, if we go by gender, then we can give it as a percentage. So, the definition is it measures the relevant part of the people who have the right to the economic resources, who have access to the land, who have control over the land. So, we need to find the number of people who has that secured facility. So, computation is, there are two parts to it. A, we measure the incidence of adults with legally recognizable documentation over the land among the total adult population, and the second part focuses on the incidence of adults who report of having perceived the secure land, the right to the land among the total adult population. So, both A and B are two complementary data sets on the security of tenure rights needed, and this is used to measure indicator 1.4.2. The calculation, the metric to calculate the two parts are given, which is the adult with legally recognized document over the land divided by the total adult population. For the second part, it is the people who perceive they have the right to the land divided by the total adult population. So, the total composite measure, the total value is taken to arrive at the value for indicator 1.4.2. Now, coming to the second, the last target 1.5. So, it states by 2030 we build the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situation, and we reduce their exposure and vulnerability to climate related extreme events and other economic, social and environmental shocks and disasters. So, for achieving target 1.5, there are 4 indicators which is given by the SDG group. So, the first indicator is the number of deaths, missing persons and directly affected persons which are attributed to the disasters divided by 100,000 population. So, the definition is, again, the indicator measures the number of people who died, who went missing or were directly affected by disasters such as tsunamis or cyclones or tornadoes divided by 100,000 population. So, that gives us the value which goes for showing what is the achievement of target 1.5 through the indicator 1.5.1. So, the calculation formula is also given, which is the number of people who have died, maybe through A1 could be through some means, A2 through some means. So, you take the composite value divided by the global population into 100,000. So, A2 could be the number of death attributed to different disasters, A3 could be the number of missing persons attributed to disasters, and B1 is the number of people who are directly affected because of various disasters. So, we need to define what are the types of disasters we would like to propose, come out with different numbers and then calculate the total based on the total population into 100,000 people. So, next coming to the second indicator, which is 1.5.2, it talks about the direct economic loss which is attributed because of disasters in relation to GDP. So, the definition is the ratio of direct economic loss. So, the method of computation is given as x equal to C2 plus C3 plus C4 C5 C6 divided by the global GDP, where C2 is the direct agricultural loss, C3 is the direct economic loss because of damages, destroyed assets which is attributed to disasters. D4 is the direct economic loss in the housing sector, D5 is the direct economic loss resulting from damaged or destroyed critical infrastructure because of disasters, and C6 is the economic loss because of cultural heritage which is damaged. So, all these formulas are given or already established. In case we need to add a few others, again we can do research and find out if it is right, and then accordingly form our own metrics to calculate the indicator. So, the third indicator is the number of countries that adopt and implement national disaster risk reduction strategies, which is in line with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction of 2015-2030. So, the definition which is given is an open-ended intergovernmental expert working group which has given indicators and terminologies related to disaster risk reduction, and this was established in the General Assembly resolution, and they are responsible for developing a set of indicators to measure the global progress in the implementation of the Sendai framework. So, it depends on the type of measures we want to put into this indicator, and based on the measures we have identified, we can come out with a computation methodology. However, they have already given a detailed listing on how to do the calculation, which is beyond the scope of this lecture. So, now coming to the indicator 1.5.4, which is the last indicator for target 1.5. It is the proportion of local government that adopt and implement the local disaster risk reduction strategies in line with the national disaster risk reduction strategies. So, what is the percentage to which the local government does the risk reduction strategies in line with the national risk reduction strategies? So, again the Sendai framework has given all the framework, what is expected out of it. So, one of the target is substantially increase the number of countries with the national and local disaster risk strategies to be in place, and based on that definition indicator has been framed, and again the indicators are across countries and it can be deployed at the national as well as at the local level. These strategies are aimed at preventing the creation of a disaster risk, reduction of existing risk, and strengthening the economic, social, health and environmental resilience. So, based on these objectives, the indicators have framed lots of measures, and it can be computed for at the local level as well as at the national level. Country wise we can calculate. So, similarly, as already presented in the document, I have now presented for goal 1 all the 5 targets and the indicators for each of these targets I have presented, and for each of these targets detailed methodology is available on how to calculate. In certain instances the methodology, as I have already stated, if it is tier 1 indicator, the methodology is clearly specified. If it is tier 2, then the methodology has been stated, but data may not be available for all the countries, and SDG group has already come up with for all the indicators. They have given out the methodology, they have given the equations, the measures to calculate, to find out what is the amount of data available. So, using the data we can find the indicator and we can find the target, and using the level of target achieved we can tell whether we have achieved the sustainability development goal. So, I have presented in this module for goal 1 5 targets. Similarly, all the goals, all the indicators are presented in the notes which is given in the SWAYAM platform in the course content. So, thus we find the global indicator framework for sustainability development goal was developed by the interagency and the expert group on SDG indicators, which is known as the IAEG SDGs, and all this has been agreed upon at the 48th session of the United Nations Statistical Commission, which was held in 2017 March. So, all the deliberations have been taken place, and after detailed deliberations in the 48th session they have consolidated the indicators, the measures through which we can calculate the indicators, and from the indicators we can arrive at the targets. The global indicator framework was later adopted by the General Assembly on 6th July 2017 and is contained in the resolution adopted by the General Assembly on work of the Statistical Commission pertaining to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So, thus we find the 17 SDGs has got 169 targets. The global indicator framework of SDG indicators, totally it is 248 indicators are there. Of this 248 indicators, we find that some of the indicators are present in, are getting repeated in few targets. So, if we are going to look at the unique number of indicators, we find there are 231 unique indicators. 13 indicators are found to be present in 2-3 places. So, for example, indicators in the global indicator framework that gets repeated is 7.B.1 is similar to 12.A.1, because both are talking about energy resources, renewable energy resources, etc. So, the indicator gets repeated in 2 SDGs, it gets in 7 SDG 7 it is found, similarly it is also found in SDG 12. So, similarly we find that 8.4.1 indicator is similar to indicator 12.2.1, 8.4.2 is similar to 12.2.2. So, this indicates that certain indicators are repeated in 2 SDGs or 3 SDGs. And so, if you are going to talk about unique indicators, if we need to measure, then there are 231 indicators for which we need to find calculations, we need to gather data and calculate, arrive at the indicators, and from the indicators we can arrive at the targets and tell us whether we have achieved the sustainability development goal. The purpose of all this exercise to find the indicators, to calculate the indicators and find whether we have achieved the targets is to ensure we leave no one behind. We want to create a circular economy. The transformation we expect by going in for this SDGs, by achieving these SDGs, there are 6 transformations that we expect. Transformation 1 is education, gender and inequality. Transformation 2 that we expect is health, well-being and demography. Transformation 3 that we expect is education, decarbonization of the environment and a sustainable industry in the for the future generations. So, transformation 4 that we expect by achieving SDG goals are sustainable food, land, water and ocean. Sustainable development in all basic resources. Transformation 5 talks about sustainable cities and communities, and the transformation 6 we expect by going in for the 17 SDG goals are digital revolution for sustainable development. So, now let us see some questions and answers regarding this topic. So, question 1, what is the main target of SDG? The Sustainable Development Goal are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future. They address the global challenges that we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace and justice. The 5 outcome targets are eradication of extreme poverty, reduction of all poverty by half, implementation of a social protective system, ensuring equal right of ownership to everyone, and building a resilient environment so that we are able to safeguard the environment, we are able to give a protective environment to the society, ensuring economic and social stability. Question 2, what are the 3 indicators in SDG at a holistic level? Chapter 40 of Agenda 21 called on countries and international community to develop indicators for sustainable development. Such indicators were needed to increase the focus on sustainable development, assist decision makers at all levels to adopt sound national sustainable development policies. Question 3, how is SDG impact measured? So, there are 6 ways by which we can measure the impact of SDGs. 1, determining most material and focused SDGs. 2. Defining the indicators extensively. 3. Defining the ambitions that we want in the SDG and the targets. 4. Collecting data and calculating the impact score. 5. Visualizing and interpreting what we get of each of the indicators. And 6. Exploring if there are further opportunities for improvement so that we are able to better achieve the SDG 17 goals. So, to summarize, in this module we have learnt about the SDG goals, sustainability development goals, the targets, the indicators, and in some instances various measures that are present to calculate the indicators. We have learnt about targets and indicators for each of the SDGs. We have understood how each indicator is defined, how it is calculated, and how we need to gather the data. Thank you.